There's a single instant that changes everything. The moment you see consciousness as the source, not the mind. Right now, you trust a voice inside you as if it were the owner of your life. What if that voice is only one thing happening inside a much vaster field? Before you decide whether that's true, try this. For the next 60 seconds, do your best not to think. Don't force it, just try. Notice what happens when you tell the mind to stop. If a thought arrives, don't judge it. Simply notice that a thought arrived. If you want, pause the video now and do that 60-second experiment. Pay attention to the texture of failing to not think, the sudden appearance of an idea, an image, a memory, maybe a worry. Note that those events appeared in your experience without your explicit invitation. When the minute is over, come back and keep reading. Most people fail this exercise in the same simple, clarifying way. Thought arises, often many of them. You're likely to notice that the voice in your head kept running even while you tried to stop it, and that your attempt to stop it was itself a thought. That small paradox is the doorway into a larger insight. The thought stream is not what you are, it's something that happens within the space of your knowing. This is the practical hinge of the title. The moment you see consciousness as the source, not the mind, everything changes. Not because I tell you so, but because your experience provides the proof. When you observe thought as a happening instead of as the sovereign ruler of your life, new options become visible. You don't have to fight or fix every thought. You can shift your point of identification to the field that notices thoughts, the field I'll call awareness or consciousness. Why this matters? Your felt identity, the I you habitually live as, usually takes its cues from the loudest, most recurrent thoughts. If your running inner commentary is anxious, your day often follows suit. If it's critical, relationships shrink around that tone. But if the I shifts to the space in which thoughts appear, the tone of your day shifts too. You begin to respond from clarity rather than react from habit. Before we go further into practices, one word of orientation. When neuroscientists like Benjamin Libet studied the timing of brain activity related to voluntary actions, they found that measurable brain signals often precede the subjective awareness of deciding by a few hundred milliseconds. That finding suggests that some processes start before you feel their intention. It does not prove that you have no agency. It simply points to a gap between the machinery that initiates certain actions and the narrative voice that claims them. Think of it as evidence that thoughts and decisions can be preceded by processes outside the conscious narrative, which makes it plausible to see thoughts as contents within a larger field of consciousness rather than as the field itself.
Other lines of inquiry, including work by groups such as HeartMath, show patterns in electromagnetic activity tied to emotional states. Those findings are intriguing and suggestive about how bodily fields and nervous systems interact with experience. They do not establish magical causation. They offer a language, field, coherence, frequency, that helps us describe how internal states can correlate with patterns in physiology and behavior. Use such language as a model, not as absolute proof. Now, if you felt that the 60-second experiment revealed something, even a small gap between you and your thoughts, here is a progressive, practical path to explore that gap and make it usable in daily life. The point is not to chase an abstract enlightenment. It's to develop tangible skills that change how you move through relationships, work, health, and money by shifting where you locate your identity. First practice, thought labeling. Duration, 7 days. Daily commitment, 5 minutes per day. Purpose, to create immediate metacognitive distance between you and your thinking. How to do it? Each day for 7 consecutive days, pick a 5-minute window, ideally a time when you're generally awake and alert, like after waking or mid-afternoon. Sit quietly with a notebook or a notes app. Close your eyes for a moment and ask, what is the first thing that arises? When a thought appears, quietly label it with a single calm word. Planning, worry, memory, judgment, desire, boredom, fear. Keep the labels simple. Do not engage with the content. Don't elaborate or argue with the thought. Notice its tone, give it a one-word tag, and let it pass. Expected markers of progress. Within a few days, you should notice a small gap opening, a space between the moment a thought appears and the moment you get pulled into its story. That gap is the practical proof that awareness exists as an observing space. You may feel lighter or simply less compelled by each thought's urgency. That's the point, to rehearse not identifying with every mental event. A few examples of labels to use. Planning.
habit, blame, self-criticism, fear, curiosity, fantasy. If a thought is emotion-laden, a flash of anger at a partner, a sudden shame about a past mistake, label it anger or shame. The label is the act of acknowledging content without accepting it as you. Over 7 days, this simple practice rewires the reflex that equates thought with identity. Mini hook. Notice the difference when you label fear versus when you let fear silently narrate your intentions. One opens a window, the other closes a door. Second practice, source tracking. Duration, 14 days. Daily commitment, 20 minutes per day, or 2 10-minute slots. Purpose, to trace recurring charged thoughts back to their origins and reduce their present authority. How to do it.
Begin by picking a recurring emotionally charged thought, not a neutral observation, but something that reliably triggers you. Examples: I'm not good enough. They can't be trusted. I should always be productive. Money is scarce. Write the thought at the top of a page and set a timer for 20 minutes. The task is not to argue with the thought, but to ask gently, when did I first feel this? And follow the thread. Seek the earliest memory associated with the feeling. It may show up as a concrete event, a criticism from a teacher, or as an impression, a childhood atmosphere of scarcity. Trace the chain back as far as you can. Use guided questions. What images appear when I look back? Who was present? What did it feel like in my body? When you find a plausible origin, name it and then intentionally place it in the past. Write, origin, age 7, teacher's criticism. Then add, this thought is a response to that past event, not necessarily an accurate reflection of now. Repeat with the same thought over several days until the emotional charge loosens. Expected markers of progress. Recurring thoughts lose their immediacy. The reflexive truthness they carried weakens. You feel more freedom to choose how to respond. In relationships, this looks like fewer automatic defensive moves. In work, it looks like less catastrophic self-talk before important presentations. Note, source tracking can surface strong emotions. If you feel overwhelmed, slow down, use shorter sessions, or seek professional support. This practice helps uncover how much of today's narrative is recycled from old recordings. Concrete vignette. Imagine Sarah, who repeatedly thinks, I must please everyone. On day 1 of source tracking, she remembers a childhood pattern where affection seemed conditional on high achievement. Naming that origin, childhood pattern, weakens the present compulsion. In a meeting weeks later, when the impulse to over-apologize arises, she labels it habit and chooses a concise contribution instead of overcompensation. The thought still appears, it just no longer runs the show. Third practice, awareness anchor. Duration, ongoing with an initial intensive phase of 14 days. Frequency, twice a day, 10 minutes each session. Purpose, to habituate recognition of awareness itself as the primary identity. How to do it. Find 2 windows in your day. Morning and late afternoon work well. For 10 minutes in each window, sit comfortably. The protocol is simple but subtle. Begin with 3 deep, slow breaths to settle. Then shift your attention from the content of thought to the space that holds experience. Instead of focusing on what you think, focus on the actor that notices thought. Use a gentle set of instructions to yourself. I am the awareness noticing thoughts. If the word I feels too tied to narrative, use here or presence. The aim is not to conjure something, but to rest in the knowing that is already present.
A concrete sequence for the 10 minutes. First 2 minutes, scan the body and notice sensations. Next 4 minutes, notice thoughts as passing events and label them silently. Return to the felt sense of awareness between each label. Final 4 minutes, open your eyes and try to maintain the sense of being the space in which experience occurs while you look around. Practice returning to this anchor whenever you feel pulled into habitual reactivity through the day. Expected markers of progress, an increasing ease in recognizing the witness of experience. Tasks feel less personally urgent, and you develop the ability to bring presence into demanding moments. A tense conversation, a difficult email, or a health scare. Over 2 weeks, this repeated anchoring builds a new default. Instead of automatically saying, I am anxious, the default becomes, I am the space in which anxiety appears. That shift in grammar begins to alter lived reality because your responses spring from observation rather than identification. A cautionary note, these practices are not guaranteed cures for debilitating anxiety or depression. If you have a diagnosis or intense symptoms, please continue with professional treatment and inform your clinician about your interest in these practices. They can often be integrated safely into therapy. At this point, you may be noticing a pattern. Labeling lets you separate, source tracking lets you contextualize, anchoring lets you identify with the field instead of the cloud of thoughts. Each practice builds on the previous one, creating layered capacity to experience awareness as primary. Let me pause and describe a pattern many people miss. The mind tends to replay prediction loops. Neural networks in your brain are optimized for prediction. They rehearse likely outcomes based on past data. If your past consistently suggested scarcity, the prediction system runs a scarcity simulation and speaks in that language. That's why simply thinking "be abundant" often fails. The pattern that has more weight keeps replaying. The practices above are not about forcefully overriding patterns. They are about exposing them to the light of observation, and then gradually introducing new inputs that alter the prediction field. This is where the field metaphor becomes useful. Imagine your interior life as a radio room. The mind plays channels. Most people believe they are the DJ because they hear music. But what if you are the room the radio plays in? The acoustics change when the room shifts. When you move your identity from the music to the room, you stop being swept by every song. You can change the station, adjust the volume, or simply realize the music does not define the room. There's also a social dimension. We are embedded in a collective thought field. Culture, family narratives, advertising, and shared anxieties form a background hum that biases what thoughts show up more often. Some research and observations suggest our physiological states, including cardiac field dynamics tracked by groups like HeartMath, correlate with our emotional tone and interpersonal coherence. Interpreted cautiously, this points to a possibility. When large numbers of people hold similar patterns, they amplify certain channels. You don't need to accept every social thought as yours. Many are echoes of collective patterns. A practical step you can take now: begin to classify your recurring thoughts into 3 types. Do this as a nightly review for a week. This will be elaborated in the next block, but here's the basic idea. Type 1, immediate, sensory-based thoughts tied to current reality. Example, I'm cold. Type 2, personal history thoughts tied to your past recordings. Example, I'm unlovable, emerging from childhood. Type 3, collective field thoughts that carry shared cultural content. Example, I must look a certain way to be acceptable, or success is defined by constant hustle. Not everything will slot cleanly, but this classification helps you see where your thoughts come from and what authority they should hold. Consider how this plays out across life domains. In relationships, if your default identification is with anxious thought, you may read benign silences as rejection. After labeling and source tracking, you begin to see the fear as a replay from previous attachment wounds. Instead of reacting defensively, you pause, name the pattern, and choose curiosity. That choice often softens the interaction. The partner feels less attacked, the conversation shifts tone, and trust can grow. In work and creativity, identification with a voice that says, I must be perfect, can paralyze you. Labeling reveals the exact voice. Source tracking traces it to a disciplinary environment or a critical mentor. Anchor practice gives you access to a steadier field from which you can take creative risks. The outcome is rarely instantaneous, but practitioners report an increased capacity to show up, to make imperfect offerings, and sometimes, over time, to actually produce better results because decision-making is less contaminated by a reactive inner critic. In health, when you're identified with catastrophic thinking, stress physiology takes over. Daily anchoring and labeling can reduce sympathetic arousal, improve coherence between heart and brain signals in the short term, and change health behaviors over weeks. These practices are supportive complements to medical care. They are not replacements. In finances, scarcity narratives learned early can lead to defensive choices like hoarding or reckless gambles. Source tracking uncovers the original programming. Reality journaling, which we will build toward, helps you test whether the scarcity narrative holds when you act from awareness rather than fear. Over time, many people move from frantic reactivity toward more measured decisions.
Mini hook. If a thought feels urgent, it's likely old programming. Trace it once and see if it still deserves authority. A few practical clarifications before I move on. When I describe consciousness as the source, I'm not asserting a metaphysical doctrine about cosmology or denying the brain's role in experience. I mean this in an operational, experiential sense, that there is a field or space of knowing, a continuity of presence, within which thoughts, sensations, and emotions appear. That space can be experienced and used as a reference point for living. Scientific studies give us hints, philosophical inquiry gives us language, your direct attention gives you the testable means to see whether this shift helps you navigate life more effectively. Now I want to give you a brief protocol to begin integrating these first 3 practices into a single week. This is an initial module you can complete over 7 to 14 days. Day 1 to 7, thought labeling daily for 5 minutes. Keep a consistent time slot. Keep a 1-line log each session. Time, dominant labels, a brief note on gap experience. Example, noticed 2 to 3 second gap after labeling. Day 4 to 14. Begin source tracking with one recurring thought, 20 minutes every other day. Write the origin and a short reframe note after each session. Days 1 to 14. Awareness anchor twice daily, 10 minutes each. Use a single page in your journal to note morning and evening anchor experiences. What felt steady, what pulled you away, and any noticeable shifts in reactivity. If you're short on time, options. Do a single 10-minute anchor and a single 5-minute labeling session each day. Normalize misses. The goal is steadiness, not perfection. A practical marker to look for by the end of this period. In at least 3 real-life moments, perhaps a tense exchange, a creative decision point, and a financial impulse, you should be able to detect that space between stimulus and reaction. You may catch yourself labeling and choosing a deliberate response rather than reacting automatically. Record those moments in a simple reality response line. Date, situation, what thought arose, what you labeled it, and what you did differently. Let's pause and consider why most people think changing content is enough. For years, popular self-help emphasized positive thinking. Replace negative thoughts with positive ones and life will follow. There's a reason that often fails. If the underlying prediction engine keeps replaying old programming, new thoughts are treated as surface noise. The aim here is deeper. Change the identity reference so the engine itself can reweight inputs. In other words, stop treating thoughts as the absolute rulers and begin treating them as informants. One of the next practices I'll introduce, the collective field investigation and the 21-day nightly review, gives tools to distinguish which thoughts are personal history and which are cultural echoes.
Another practice, the Reality Response Journal, will give you a month-long structure for testing whether subtle shifts in your field correlate with detectable changes in events. We'll get to those in the next section. But before I go further, I want to offer a short-lived example that ties together labeling, source tracking, and anchoring. Picture Marcus, a freelance designer. Habit. When a client asks for revisions, the immediate thought is, they're going to cancel, I'm incompetent. He labels this thought fear, traces it to a formative internship where a supervisor publicly shamed him, and anchors to awareness before responding to client emails. After 2 weeks, when a revision request arrives, Marcus notices the familiar surge, tags it fear, remembers the internship origin, and then replies from the steadier field of presence. Thanks for the feedback. I'll make these changes and follow up with options. The reply is competent and calm. The client is satisfied. Marcus didn't manifest overnight success. He did, however, stop allowing the old narrative to decide his professional posture. A final ethical reminder here. If any of these practices bring up intense trauma or destabilize you, stop and seek professional support. These methods are tools for noticing and reorientation. They are not trauma therapy. If you're working with a therapist, consider bringing these practices to the session to integrate safely. We're now at a point of transition. You've tried the 60-second experiment, perhaps felt a gap. You've learned a short-term labeling practice to create distance. You've opened source tracking to put recurring thoughts in context. You've begun daily anchoring to cultivate an identity rooted in awareness. Those are the foundations. What follows next, and what I'll lead you into now, is the bridge from awareness practices into social and behavioral experiments. Classifying thought origins more systematically, experimenting with a reality response journal to test what shifts in the field actually correlate with, and then a structured identity shift protocol that rewrites the grammar of I am. Before we move into that deeper experimental phase, take a moment, look back through your week's notes, if you've kept them, and pick one moment where labeling changed how you responded. Hold that data point. It's your first evidence that the field can be reoriented. When you're ready, in the next segment, we'll expand classification into a 21-day nightly review that distinguishes type 1, 2, 3 thoughts, introduce the 30-day reality response journal with a template you can use immediately, and begin the 30-day identity shift protocol that translates insight into daily habits. Along the way, we'll return to the neuroscience and to considerations about the collective thought field and physiological coherence, always with caution and a focus on what you can observe for yourself. Pick up your journal.
We're moving from practice to experiment, from noticing to testing what actually responds when the center of identity shifts from thought to awareness. This next sequence is the method you'll follow for the classification work, the reality response experiment, and the full 30-day identity shift protocol. Each piece is practical, measurable, and repeatable. I'll give precise times, templates you can copy verbatim into a notes app, and the markers that tell you whether the training is taking root. First, the 21-day nightly review to classify thought origins. Duration, 21 consecutive nights. Daily commitment, 10 to 15 minutes each night. Purpose, to map where your recurring thoughts are coming from so you can decide which ones deserve action and which ones are echoes to be released. How to do it. Each evening, open your journal and list up to 5 thoughts that repeatedly showed up that day. Don't censor. Include the small ones, the running commentary about appearance, status updates, performance worries, and the big charged ones. For each thought, write 3 short fields. 1, the thought as it appeared, 1 line. 2, type classification, type 1, type 2, or type 3. 3, a 1-sentence trace. If type 2, note the first memory or impression that seems linked. If type 3, note where you think you may have picked it up, media, family dinner, advertising, social feed. If type 1, note the immediate trigger, cold room, empty stomach, physical sensation. Example entry, thought, they're judging me. Type 2, trace, parents' criticism after recitals, age 9. Another entry, thought, if you're not hustling, you'll fall behind. Type 3, trace, work culture posts, mornings on social feed. If you can't trace a type 2 thought on a given night, simply mark it possible type 2 needs deeper tracing and carry it forward to the next night. Each week, look back over your entries and count frequencies. Which thoughts repeated most? Which types dominated? This quantitative tally is the point. By day 7, you'll see patterns. By day 21, you'll know which strands of narrative have the most momentum. Expected markers of progress. After 7 nights, you'll likely recognize a handful of recurrent thoughts and begin to suspect their origins. After 14 nights, your mapping will show clear clusters, personal history threads versus cultural background hum. By day 21, you should have a prioritized list of 3 to 5 thoughts to take into the deeper source tracking work already introduced. Those will be the ones that, when shifted, produce measurable changes in behavior. A few procedural cautions. If tracing a memory brings strong emotional reactions or flashbacks, shorten the session and shift to anchoring practices. Do not push through traumatic material alone. Seek a trauma-informed therapist. This method is for clarity and practical reorientation, not for deep trauma processing without professional support.
Now, the 30-day reality response journal. Purpose, to test whether shifting your identifying reference from thought to awareness correlates with changes in how life unfolds. This is an experimental log, not proof of metaphysical causation, but a disciplined way to notice patterns in behavior, feeling, and outcomes. Duration, 30 days. Daily commitment, 5 to 10 minutes of immediate logging, plus 2 short check-ins during the day, 1 minute each. Structure, baseline week, active experiment weeks, reflective wrap. Week 0, baseline, days -6 to 0, optional but recommended. For 7 days before you begin the formal 30-day run, create quick records of 3 moments each day when a thought seemed to drive your behavior. Note date, time, situation, thought, reaction, and immediate outcome. This gives you a baseline against which to compare later. Days 1 to 30, the journal template. Each morning, take 1 minute to write an intention line. Today, I will notice when thought X appears and label it. Choose one specific thought pattern as your experimental variable for the day or week. During the day, when a notable moment happens, a tension with someone, a decision point, a stress spike, use a 2-line in-the-moment note. 1, thought that appeared. 2, label/type and whether you pause to notice awareness before acting. In the evening, spend 5 minutes filling a short form. Date, time, situation, 1 line, thought that appeared, label used, type, 1, 2, 3, body sensation, action taken, outcome, what happened externally, what I noticed about my field or tone, 1 sentence, 1 change for tomorrow. Example evening entry, 2025-05-12, 3:10 p.m. Situation, client asked for changes during call. Thought, they'll cancel. Label, fear. Type, 2, body, tight chest, clenched jaw. Action, paused, breathed, asked a clarification question. Outcome, client clarified scope, no cancellation. Field or tone, felt steadier after pause, voice calmer. Change, practice 3 deep breaths before replies tomorrow. Expected markers of progress. Over 30 days, look for these measurable shifts. Reduction in the number of automatic reactions per day, counted on your daily form, increase in the % of moments where you labeled before acting, and changes in the emotional intensity of the body sensations associated with old thoughts, rate from 1 to 10 each night. A sample metric. If you start with 10 reactive moments a day and by day 30 you record 5, that's observable change. It's not a miracle, it's retraining. A balanced caveat. Changes in external circumstances are multifactorial. The journal is not a guarantee that money increases or perfect relationships appear. Instead, it's your controlled experiment to see whether shifting identity correlates with different behavior and outcomes in predictable ways.
Now we expand the identity shift protocol, the 30-day structured program that leads from inventory to embodiment. Think of it as 4 sequential phases, each lasting roughly 1 week, with clear tasks, daily exercises, and markers. The full commitment is 30 days. If you can't do 30 straight, approach the phases sequentially and repeat any week until the markers appear. Phase 1. Inventory, days 1 through 7. Purpose. Collect an exhaustive list of I am statements and common self-narratives. Daily tasks. Morning, 10 minutes. Awareness anchor practice. 5 minutes settling, 5 minutes scanning for I am lines that feel automatic. Midday, 5 minutes. One short labeling session. Observe recurring self-statements and label them. I am anxious, label anxiety thought. Evening, 10 minutes. Create an inventory page in your journal listing every I am statement you notice, grouped by domain: relationships, work, health, money, identity. Sample inventory entry. Relationships: I am needy, I am hard to love. Work: I am not a leader, I am a perfectionist. Health: I am fragile. Money: I am bad with money. Markers: by day 7, you should have 20 to 50 I am statements mapped and a sense of which ones feel most activated. Note the language. Is I am used as descriptive observation or as an absolute truth? That linguistic clue matters. Phase 2, source investigation, days 8 through 14. Purpose: trace the strongest I am lines back to their origins using source tracking tools. Daily tasks: 2 sessions of 20 minutes on 3 priority I am statements. Rotate if you have more. Use the source tracking method. Write the statement at the top. Ask, when did I first believe this? And follow images, early memories, bodily impressions. Label the origins succinctly: age, event, person, and write a brief reframe sentence that places the belief in context, e.g., origin, age 8, parents' silent disappointment. Reframe: this was about their limitation, not my worth. Markers: the belief's emotional charge should begin to lessen. You may find you can consider the statement more objectively. If a particular belief doesn't soften, note that as a candidate for professional therapy support. Phase 3, awareness recognition, days 15 through 21. Purpose: rehearse identifying with the field of awareness rather than the content of thoughts. Daily tasks: morning, 20 minutes. Awareness anchor, twice daily if possible. Begin with 5 minutes of breath settling, 10 minutes of resting in the felt sense of being the space that knows, and 5 minutes of open eye practice bringing that felt sense into a short walk or into the start of your day. Midday interventions: set a timer 3 times daily. When it rings, pause for 10 breaths and note one thought that has been running. Label it and return to awareness.
Evening. Write a 1-sentence account of 3 moments where you intentionally operated from the field rather than the voice. Markers: an increasing number of moments where you catch the self-narrative before it dictates action. You may feel a softening of reactivity and a clearer capacity to choose responses. Phase 4, embodiment and role play, days 22 to 30. Purpose: translate recognition into language and behavior, new grammar, new habit loop. Daily tasks: morning, 20 minutes. The daily integration practice described below, 20 minutes total. In conversation practice, deliberately answer simple social prompts from awareness. For example, when someone asks, "How are you?" practice responding from the field, not from a story. Rewrites: story response: "I'm really overwhelmed." Field response: "There's some overwhelm here, and I'm aware of it." Story response: "I'm terrible with money." Field response: "A thought of scarcity is showing up. I'm choosing to look at the facts." Behavioral experiments: pick small tasks, send an overdue email, post a draft, make a budget adjustment, and practice pausing, labeling, anchoring, and then acting. Note the outcome. Markers: you'll find you increasingly use I am as observation rather than identity. The grammatical change is subtle but real. It reduces fusion with thought. People often report more ease in social moments, fewer defensive reactions, and a clearer capacity to take imperfect action. Daily integration practice, 20 minutes each morning or any consistent time that precedes most of your day. This practice consolidates the protocols into routine living. Sequence, 20 minutes total. Minute 0 to 2, wakeful breathwork. 3 slow cyclical breaths to settle. Minute 2 to 12, awareness anchor. Rest attention on the felt sense of presence. Notice thoughts as they arise and label them without elaboration. If a thought holds strong, locate it in the body and note one physical quality: heat, tightness, tone. Minute 12 to 17, targeted labeling. Write 3 labels that you predict will show up that day based on recent journaling. For example, perfection, scarcity, comparison. Intend: if this thought arises, I'll label it and pause. Minute 17 to 20, intention setting and embodied rehearsal. Say one simple intention in the present tense. Today, I will be the space that notices. Then rehearse one micro behavior, 2 breaths before replying to messages, to anchor the intention. This 20-minute practice is the daily integration anchor. If you're short on time, do 10 minutes, 5 minutes anchor, 3 minutes labeling, 2 minutes intention. The role of the collective field and how to manage it. We live in a shared narrative environment. Advertising, social media, family traditions, and dominant cultural stories supply a steady stream of type 3 thoughts.
They have power because they work by repetition and social reinforcement.
The aim is not to become isolated or to avoid culture. It's to develop a filter. Practical steps to manage collective field influence. Media diet design. Choose one block per day, 30 to 60 minutes, when you consume news, social media, or culturally loaded content. Outside of that block, note when a Type 3 thought appears and mark it collective in your nightly review. Boundary practice. When a collective thought triggers strong reactivity, pause and ask, did I think this before I saw that social post? If not, treat it as probable Type 3 and apply labeling and disengagement. Social contagion experiments. In a conversation, deliberately voice a quieter, coherent tone. Calm curiosity rather than alarm. See how the interpersonal field responds. This is not about controlling others. It's about noticing how your tone affects group dynamics. A brief, cautious note on physiological coherence and field metaphors. Groups like HeartMath have shown correlations between coherent cardiac rhythms and self-reported emotional states. Researchers can measure certain electromagnetic signatures of the heart that vary with emotion. Interpreted prudently, these studies suggest that our bodily states and nervous systems participate in patterns of coherence that correlate with interpersonal ease. That's compelling as a model for why calming the field matters, because people read tone, rhythm, and posture unconsciously. It's not mystical omnipotence, it's interpersonal resonance. When you stabilize your inner field, your presence becomes a clearer signal in social contexts, and that can change the responses you get. Now some concrete life domain vignettes to make this real. Relationships. Imagine you and your partner are late to an appointment. Two narratives appear. The reactive voice says, they're inconsiderate again, we'll be late because of them, which triggers blame and escalating tone. The awareness response notices the spiraling thought, labels it blame, type 2, old family pattern of punctuality and shame, and anchors in presence. You then ask, what would help now? The energy shifts from accusation to problem solving. The practical result, the conversation is shorter, calmer, and collaboration increases. Over weeks of practice, partners often report fewer blow-ups and more repair after misunderstandings, not because the world changed magically, but because the habit loops that drove escalation were interrupted. Work and creativity. Recall Marcus, the designer, who used source tracking and anchoring to change his email responses. Another example, Layla, an editor who habitually declines to submit drafts because the inner critic says, this is amateurish. She uses the 30-day protocol. Inventory reveals, I am not good enough. Source tracing links it to a mentor's harsh feedback. Awareness practice creates a pause between critique and action. She then runs behavioral experiments. She sets a rule to submit one imperfect draft every 10 days. After several cycles, her submission rate increases and opportunities begin to appear. The key is not that the universe rewards her instantly. The key is that her behavior aligns more with curiosity than avoidance. Health. Stress and catastrophic narratives can keep physiology in high alert. A friend, Raj, used the daily integration practice and reality journal to note that his default narrative around minor aches was, this is serious. He labeled that thought catastrophe, traced it to an early health scare in adolescence, and began to treat each worrying thought as a prompt for gentle investigation rather than immediate escalation. With the anchoring practices, he noticed lower heart rate variability reactivity during work stress and felt calmer going into medical appointments. He kept doing his prescribed medical follow-ups. These practices complemented care rather than replaced it. Finances. Scarcity narratives can cause a feedback loop. Fearful thinking leads to short-sighted choices, which create stress and reinforce fear. Applying source tracking to the belief money is scarce allowed one client, Anya, to see its origin in a childhood of unstable income. She then ran the reality response journal experiment, acted from small, deliberate choices, a 24-hour pause before big purchases, a weekly budget check-in done from an anchored state, and tracked outcomes. Over months, she didn't discover guaranteed riches. She made different choices with less panic, which improved cash flow reliability. That is the measurable value, changing the decision tone. Practical FAQ you'll encounter. Q. How long before I notice anything? Expect some immediate micro-wins, a single pause in a tense moment, after a few days of labeling and anchoring. Deeper changes to habitual patterns often require 3 to 4 weeks of consistent practice. Neural circuits reweight slowly. Persistence matters more than intensity. Q. What if I miss a day or regress? Normalize lapses. The practices are training, not moral tests. If you miss a day, note it in the journal and return the next day. Expect fluctuations. Long-term consistency is the predictor of change. Q. Can this replace therapy or medication? No. If you have clinical anxiety, depression, PTSD, or other conditions, these practices can be adjunctive but should not replace professional treatment.
If you notice worsening symptoms, seek clinical help and share your interest in these practices with your provider. Q. Will this make me detached or disengaged? If misunderstood, non-identification can feel distant. The intention here is not to become numb. It is to see thoughts as phenomena so you can respond from clarity. Many practitioners report increased compassion because observation reduces reactivity and increases presence. Q. Does this prove consciousness is the source in a metaphysical sense? The program is experiential and pragmatic. It does not claim scientific proof of metaphysical truths.
Instead, it invites you to test whether treating awareness as an operational reference changes the quality of your life. A short troubleshooting guide. If labeling feels mechanical and unhelpful, pick simpler labels, thought, feeling, and slow down. The aim is clarity, not cleverness. If source tracking re-traumatizers, stop and seek professional support. Use 4-minute sessions instead of 20 and anchor to breath between exposures. If anchoring feels like forcing a state, shift to gentle noticing rather than trying to fabricate serenity. You're noticing what's already present. If the journal feels overwhelming, reduce entries to one key moment each day. The essential data is consistency. A simple metric system you can use to quantify progress. On your nightly entries, include 3 scales from 1 to 10. Reactivity score, how reactive did you feel today? Presence score, how much did you identify with awareness versus thought? Clarity score, how clear were decisions today? Record these 3 numbers each day. Over 30 days, plot the trend. Even small, steady movement, reactivity down from 7 to 5, presence up from 3 to 6, is meaningful. It's the kind of empirical evidence that comforts pragmatic people who want to see whether practices make a difference. A short map for integrating all practices into a realistic month. Week 1, labeling plus daily anchor, 5 minutes labeling, 2 times 10 minutes anchor. Start nightly review nights 1 to 7. Baseline reality entries optional. Inventory I am statements end of week. Week 2, continue labeling plus anchor. Begin source tracking for top 3 beliefs, 20 minutes every other day. Nightly review continues. Week 3, increase anchoring to twice daily 10 to 12 minutes. Continue source tracking. Begin 30-day reality journal and daily integration practice. Week 4, embodiment and role play. Daily integration practice each morning 20 minutes. Behavioral experiments 3 times a week. Continue nightly review for consolidation. End of day 30, write a 1-page summary. Metrics, 3 moments where you responded differently, and apply for the next 30 days. Which practices to keep, which to scale back, and which beliefs to revisit. An optional addendum, the identity grammar cheat sheet. When an I am statement arises, use the rewrite ladder. Raw fusion, I am anxious. Labeling, anxiety is present, removes identity fusion. Tracing, this anxiety is likely connected to X, contextualizes. Choice, I notice anxiety, I can act from awareness, restores agency. Action, I will take one small move aligned with clarity, bridge to behavior. Practice the latter in low-stakes moments first. It becomes faster with repetition and then deployable under stress. A final set of many experiments you can run over the next 30 days to test measurable changes in your field. 1. The pause test, 2 weeks. Before replying to any emotional email, wait 2 minutes.
Record whether your response tone differs from what it would have been without the pause. Metric, % of responses where tone is calmer. 2. The social tone test, 3 weeks. In 3 conversations per week, intentionally hold a steady breath and soft tone when disagreement arises. Observe whether the other person mirrors the tone. Metric, % of conversations with de-escalated outcomes. 3. The decision delay test, 4 weeks. For any non-urgent financial decision above a preset amount, wait 24 hours and practice the labeling ladder before acting. Metric, number of decisions made with more information or less regret. Each experiment is small, measurable, and negotiable. They are not about proving mystical laws. They are about changing the conditions under which choices are made. We should return briefly to neuroscience and method. The Libet findings and related work suggest that some brain signals associated with initiation precede the felt sense of decision. Interpretations vary. The conservative reading is that some initiation processes are pre-conscious. The integration reading is that consciousness plays a coordinating role that is not reducible to instantaneous brain signals. Use the neuroscientific evidence as a doorway to humility about the mind's authorship, not as a philosophical conclusion. In practice, that humility frees you from the tyranny of immediate thoughts without taking away the practical capacity to decide. That's the operational win. A final ethical note: if these practices reveal significant distress or a history of trauma that resurfaces, please contact a qualified mental health professional. This work is a complement to clinical care, not a replacement. Now, the last practical resources you can implement immediately. Download or set up a simple reality response template in any notes app with the fields I outlined: date, situation, thought, label, type, body, action, outcome, notes. Make one entry every evening.
For the nightly 21-day review, create a checklist of 5 slots per night to capture recurring thoughts and classifications. For the identity inventory, make a list of I am statements and circle the top 5 that feel most activated. Prioritize source tracking those 5. If you do nothing else, practice the 60-second experiment once per week for the next month, followed immediately by a 5-minute labeling session. Let that repeated micro-evidence remind you that thoughts happen in awareness, not as identity. What changes when you truly start to live from that recognition? Here are the kinds of shifts people commonly report, framed modestly and without promise. More space in conversations, fewer escalations in conflict, clearer choices at work, reduced bodily reactivity to minor stresses, the courage to take imperfect action, and a steadier sense of self that is not buffeted by every passing opinion. For many, the world doesn't warp into magic, it becomes more navigable.
You trade the tyranny of every passing fear for the practical capacity to act from clarity. The title claim, "The moment you see consciousness as the source, not the mind, everything changes," is both an invitation and an experiment. It is not a metaphysical decree to be believed on faith. It's an operational proposition to be tested in your own life with the tools I've given you: the 60-second test, 7-day labeling, 14-day source tracking, the awareness anchor, the 21-day review, the 30-day reality journal, the 30-day identity shift protocol, and the daily 20-minute integration practice. If you choose to take this up, be patient and kind with yourself. These are skills built through repetition, humility, and curious observation. If at any point the work surfaces more than you can hold, slow down and seek support. If you're already working with a clinician, share these experiments and invite integration. One final practical invitation: pick one programmatic commitment right now. Either copy the 7-day labeling protocol into your calendar and begin tomorrow morning, or start the 21-night review tonight. Don't try to launch everything at once. Choose one steady habit and build outward from that success. If this message landed for you, if the idea of shifting the reference from the mind to consciousness feels relevant, grab the 7-day labeling practice and the 30-day reality journal template. If you'd like the template I described, subscribe so you can download the journal and the checklists to guide your month of practice. The moment you test it, you'll have data. The moment you notice a gap between a thought and the urge to respond, you'll have evidence. The moment you consistently choose awareness over fusion with thought, things begin to change. Small at first, then in ways you can measure. Try it, keep a simple log, and watch the field of your life respond to the steadier, quieter place you now occupy.